Okay, welcome everybody. This is our last event, the series of events we'll be having this week as part of the Contested Cities Week, Contested Cities Network. My name is Sara Gonzalez. I'm a lecturer here in the School of Geography. We've got lots of information about this event in our blog website, and we also we've been recording these talks, so you can also watch the Monday and the Tuesday and the Wednesday talk, and this one as well, when it gets put on the internet.
Is that going to stay on?
Yeah.
Sort of on the Leeds side?
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube.
So yeah, so if you Google Leeds Contested Cities YouTube, this comes up. So today's presentation is one where we're trying to take advantage of the fact that Débora is here visiting from Buenos Aires, and that two colleagues in the School of Geography have been thinking similarly about issues in different parts of the world. So we're trying to put three different geographical contexts and looking at them from a theoretical approach of accumulation by dispossession. So it's really great, because otherwise maybe Paul and Stuart might not have been presented together. So we use this opportunity for them to kind of think relationally about their own work as well. So I think each of them is going to present for 20 minutes maximum, hopefully, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Okay, so they'll have different case studies from their own work, from London, Buenos Aires, and whereabouts?
Shanghai and Nanjing.
Shanghai and Nanjing in China. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge to try to connect all these different places through one lens. But let's see. Thank you very much.
I see myself in this. Okay, good evening, everybody. So I'm going to just briefly talk about accumulation by dispossession to begin with, and then I'm going to try to give a kind of what I'm calling a grounding of accumulation by dispossession. Because accumulation by dispossession is something that's become quite, it's a kind of familiar refrain now that everything's accumulation by dispossession. It's quite an abstract term. It gets described in very sort of very generalized ways, and then it can, when academics and others write about it, they tend to sort of just apply the concept to a case, again in quite a general way. I want to try to in this presentation try to talk about what is the dispossession that's taking place and what is the accumulation, and we understand the accumulation as well. So just for those who are familiar with the concept, I'm just going to try to sort of summarize it in a nutshell. For those who are not familiar, it's maybe new. Effectively, accumulation by dispossession stems most recently from David Harvey's work, David Harvey, the geographer. And Harvey wrote this book in 2003 called The New Imperialism. And in that book, he kind of set out a big global analysis of the state of capitalism, arguing that we're in a new era of imperialism, obviously. But the key sort of concept that came out of that book, which he's kind of been running with ever since and has been very, very influential, is the notion that we're in a phase, or have been in the phase of capitalism over the last 30 to 40 years, in which dispossession, by which he means all manner of acts and processes by which people are, have their resources, have their livelihoods, have their property rights, not just people but communities and also maybe even countries, have those resources, territories, spaces effectively stolen or grabbed and brought into a kind of more normal functioning of the circuits of capital accumulation. Because accumulation that takes place normally in capitalism is not working very well. There's not enough profitable opportunities in the world for capital to make profits. Therefore, there are moments of big crises. Those crises are getting bigger each time. And so alongside the normal functioning of markets, which doesn't really exist, there is no kind of normal function of capitalism. There is no accumulation without dispossession, but he's trying to emphasize the notion that the normal sort of everyday dispossession of a worker of their wages, of the value of their product through the capitalist appropriating part of the value of their labour in profit, that kind of goes on as normal. What he's talking about here is all kinds of processes that go alongside that. So going back to Marx and talking about the notion of primitive accumulation being the kind of the moment in which capitalism emerges in the world, and it's not as kind of, it doesn't emerge overnight, it takes a long time, but it's a process by which the state and other actors are present in effectively creating individual property rights, removing resources and access to reproduction, social reproduction from a large number of people, putting it in the hands of a few people, and creating the primitive accumulation, the original accumulation of capital. And what Harvey's arguing, in common with many sort of contemporary Marxists, is that that primitive accumulation has always been present within capitalism. There's always been a process by which people are have resources, access to alternative means of reproduction removed from them, but it's become increasingly necessary for the state system, for big corporations and so on, to rely increasingly on this other part of capitalism, this primitive accumulation part. So Harvey does this big, grand tour through all the different acts of dispossession, and what you get really is kind of just lots of things like land grabs, but also privatization. Privatization for Harvey is like the cutting edge of accumulation by dispossession. So privatization involves the state, it involves neoliberal policies, it involves them rolling out across different parts of the world, privatizing previously public or collective resources and handing them either at a cheap value or no value to capital. Capital can then put those cheapened or devalued assets, resources profitably back into the system. And what's underpinning it all is the idea that there's an over-accumulation crisis of capital. So accumulation by dispossession is necessary in order to solve that problem. We can see it now. We can relate pretty much everything that's going on in the world in terms of evictions, in terms of the EU's policy towards Greece, Spain, and so on. These are all parts of accumulation by dispossession. So, okay, there's a huge amount we could carry on talking about there, and we could talk about it for a long time about what, how does accumulation by dispossession work in relation to Marxist theory and so on. There's been a bit of a backlash against Harvey's reworking of primitive accumulation. There's a lot of debates within Marxism about it. I see the problems with it, but I'm pretty sold on the notion that it's happening. It's a really useful way of describing and explaining what's going on at the moment. But for me, I want to kind of get into how it actually plays out in people's lives, because the only real way in which we're going to stop accumulation by dispossession is if we understand how it is affecting people and how people can organize around it. And I want to also understand how accumulation is enabled through dispossession. So, most of my research in the last 6-7 years has been about housing regeneration, housing privatisation in the UK. And this particular story starts in 1997 when Tony Blair, New Labour, came to power. So the Aylesbury estate, well, they stood on the scaffold on the fire exit of the Aylesbury estate, surrounded by police officers, saying, this estate is like a symbol of everything that's wrong with Thatcherism. So we've got to take this public housing estate, and we're going to give the people of this estate the future that they've been denied under Thatcher. And the idea was this, urban renaissance was born. Blair and others were going to commit resources to inner city regeneration, urban regeneration, and they were going to invest in many of the council estates and social housing estates that had been simply deprived of investment over 20 to 30 years. So in 2000, New Labour launched its decent homes policy, and this, of course, always sounds great. There's going to be decent homes. What does decent homes really mean? Well, basically, it meant that they were going to bring up council housing to a very, very, very minimum standard, and it was a very minimal technical standard. So, we might think of decency in one thing. This was more about how old your bathroom was, how old your kitchen was. Doesn't matter whether it was working or not. If it was more than 20 years old, it would get replaced automatically. And there are loads of reasons for that I'm not going to go into. But local authorities were basically given 3 options to invest in the urban renaissance. They were to sell their council housing estates to housing associations, to social landlords. These were not-for-profit landlords, but they were part of a different regulatory system of social housing, and those housing providers today are being commercialised and privatised, and they're privatising themselves right now. So there was a big opposition to stock transfer, as it was called. Tenants saw this as privatisation; they were right to. Another option was to introduce a thing called arm's length companies, which I'm not going to go into. And another option was the private finance initiative, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Interestingly enough, the government would not allow local authorities to borrow directly and invest directly in their own housing. They had to go through these 3 routes to meet the decency target, and they had to meet the decency target by 2010. So, I'm going to argue that PFI is accumulation by dispossession, just in case you're wondering where I'm going. PFI is very, very complicated. Someone sitting in this room knows only too well how boring and complicated it can be, but tonight I'm going to nail it. I'm just going to nail it as an explanation. So it is a government scheme that outsources the design, the upfront financing, and the construction of new public infrastructure to a private sector consortium as part of these long-term management and maintenance contracts. Okay, so imagine the university. Don't imagine it, it's here. Here's the university. The university rolls up all of the maintenance and management of its buildings. This lecture theatre needs it, and outsources it for 30 years to a private consortium made up of, big multinational real estate developers, companies, and banks. The banks themselves help finance the infrastructure refurbishment. So the university itself doesn't raise the money. They give that responsibility to the private sector. The private sector raises the finance and then refurbishes the university. This is effectively what PFI is. It's outsourcing everything that the public sector pretty much used to do to its own assets, its own infrastructure, and it's giving it to the private sector to do. So we now have PFI everything. We have PFI hospitals, which are going bankrupt. We have PFI schools, where there are loads of problems for teachers and pupils trying to use the schools. We have PFI roads, housing, street lighting, you name it, we've got it. And the most important thing in terms of political discourse is that PFI is very, very expensive, because it involves the private sector borrowing money at private sector rates, because the private sector is a risk. It's a risk. The private sector, could go bust. Private companies could go bust. The state doesn't tend to go bust, so they have a better interest rate deal straight away. So you're looking at a doubling of the cost of borrowing through PFI than you would do through the state over 30 years. So you get very expensive public infrastructure, you get very big profit margins, and you get an absence of cost control, because the public sector also outsources the responsibility for monitoring the contracts to the very companies themselves. It's self-regulation, it's self-monitoring. They're basically dumping it into the private sector to make money out of it. So it's a corporate license basically to print money. I'm not going to go through this, but basically there's a huge concentration in the PFI sector now. A couple of companies, a couple of interests are owning more and more of the contracts, to the point that they are now, enriching themselves greatly through the accumulation of these contracts. This is what we owe as taxpayers in the UK. This is our schedule of payments going from 1996-7 all the way to 2050. It's over 300 billion, and a lot of that is unnecessary cost because we could have done it ourselves much cheaper. So PFI is a form of dispossession from above because it's for 4 reasons. 1, it replaces direct state borrowing, which is cheaper, and opens up more profitable opportunities for capital that didn't previously exist. 2, it enables capital to commercially exploit public services whilst financed and underwritten by the state. So the private consortiums don't have to make a market for public housing. They don't have to make a market for schools. We've done it for them. State and us have all said we need public services, we provide for them. We've built them up as assets to be reinvested in. They don't have to worry about that. So it's easy money. And it's underwritten by the state. We guarantee all the contracts. The state, the government guarantees the contracts, it guarantees the payments. The third aspect of this is that PFI generates affordability gaps because it's so expensive, and because of the way the whole financing and funding regimes work, it creates affordability gaps in public budgets to actually pay the PFI companies to do the infrastructure maintenance. That leads to lots of land deals at the beginning of the contract. So if the NHS has got some PFI schemes in Leeds, I'm pretty sure there'll be a land deal attached to that, whereby in the contracts they'll get some land, but in the future they could get more land if they run out of money. And finally, it facilitates this systemic corporate tax evasion, because those companies pretty much that own the PFI contracts, a lot of them are offshore. They're in Jersey, they're in Guernsey, they're going via Luxembourg. They're not paying tax. They might be paying a little bit, they're not paying a lot. So think of it like this. We already pay twice as much for these contracts than we need to, and then we don't get any tax back from them. So it's creating a giant affordability gap in our own public finances, which means more PFI. So in housing terms, basically, I've written about this elsewhere in Antibode, it creates this neoliberal straitjacket. PFI comes with a whole policy guidance and framework that creates a straitjacket on local authorities. They have to compete with each other to get the PFI credits. They've got to design gentrification projects into the housing schemes. The financial model is very complicated, but ultimately they need to develop private housing in order to partly pay for the contracts. And residents must be consulted, but their opinions count for nothing. If I say I don't want it, the local authority will say that's a shame, but legally we don't have to listen to anything you've got to say. So very briefly going to talk now about what's going on in Brixton on the Mitesfield North estate. This is the PFI regeneration scheme that began in 2012. It's a 25-year contract. 25 years, the residents of this estate must live with a PFI consortium. And it's here if you want to know what that is. It looks quite crude from far. So it's in Lambeth. It's very central. Very central. It's very important. Brixton is being gentrified. Has been being gentrified for a few years. Loads of inner and central and inner city London is being gentrified. Every day you get gentrification stories in the Guardian or whatever. Property values are going up month on month, massive amounts. And so these PFI contractors and consortia who've got some of these contracts and got some of the land from these deals, they're just sitting on value, just going up all the time. So Mitesfield North is, pretty much a classic council estate. I haven't got time to show you photos of the architecture and so on. It's a classic council estate, but it's, so it's been stigmatized, had all kinds of problems with crime, unemployment, deprivation, the usual stuff that is usually associated with a council estate. However, at the same time, the people who live there actually like living there. People don't want to leave. They're happy there. It's where people have been previously displaced from other slum clearance programs were actually housed in this estate. When it was brand new, it was a great place to live. And most people didn't want to be demolished. If there was going to be any demolition, they wanted to stay on the estate. The initial regeneration plan was that the government would provide £114.6 million towards the scheme in subsidy. So one thing I forgot to tell you is that, so PFI is all publicly financed, but the private sector finance it first and then we pay them back. So the government over 25 years or over 30 years as the original contract, they'll put in £114.6 million. And that pays for all the capital infrastructure that's being built. So this is the usual PFI project. You demolish you demolish quite a lot of council housing and you replace it. You refurbish other housing. You do a new community centre, public relevant park. And in this project, we're going to redevelop the district heating system. So everyone in the estate will be reconnected to a district heating system for the estate that will provide hot water and central heating. And they were only going to build 187 new flats. So this is very important. This was like the original vision, 2006 to 2009. There is no displacement and no dispossession going on here. Homes that get knocked down get rebuilt. People get to stay. There's no issue. Very small amount of private development. And this is basically how they're going to restructure the estate to unlock some land, to build some new housing, and to re-provide green space. And this is very important for this issue of dispossession. The local authority in 2005, all the way through to 2009, promised there were 58 leaseholders on the estate, council leaseholders, people who were tenants who bought their home under the right to buy. They were promised that any homes that would be demolished, they would be rehoused on the estate. There would be no problem. And that's why those leaseholders in 2005 voted on the biggest turnout for yes for the scheme. They were the single largest portion of yes voters because they had this promise. In 2009, Regenta, the PFI consortium, is chosen. And I wanted to show you this sort of map of the company because it just shows you that we're not dealing with a consortium, we're not dealing with one company, we're dealing with, this is Regenta, these are its contractors. It's got 5 contractors. Each main contractor has dozens of subcontractors. So this chain would go on and on and on all the way down. Regenta itself is owned by, ultimately, Henderson Infrastructure Holding Company in Jersey, and Pinnacle owns, part of Regenta is owned by Hong Kong Investor Group. So basically it's 60% owned on this side in Hong Kong, and it's 100% owned on that side by Jersey. So you get a sense here of how global capital, global finance is circulating and investing in this small estate in London. So in 2009, there was a land deal. How long have we got? A few minutes, okay. Okay, so there was a land deal, and the first land deal basically allowed Regenta to double the amount of private housing. In return, they would get £8 million. Local authorities would get £8 million for the sale of the land, guaranteed minimum price. There'd also profit sharing on the new homes being sold. And Regenta would give 41 shared ownership homes and 105 new social rented homes. Okay, this is very important. Homeowners would be protected from displacement. I'm rushing through this. In 2011, coalition government came to power, and under this whole austerity programme, forced landlords to find £16 million in savings from the scheme. Okay, this is before the contract's begun. So there's a new land deal before the PFI contract began. Regenta, the consortium, was given the whole private land for free. Okay, that £8 million gone. The £8 million was effectively given back to the company, which meant that their borrowing was less, which meant that they could offer the landlord a cheaper contract, right, by about £2 million. So £8 million out, £2 million back in. Doesn't sound like a very good deal. They've also increased the amount of private housing to 503 homes now, and there's no more social rented housing being built, new social rented housing. So in the space of a couple of years, the whole deal has changed. This is accumulation by dispossession. We were going to get 105 social rented homes, we don't get them now. The public sector was going to get £8 million, doesn't get it anymore. 2012, the contract begins. the regeneration starts, and then so do all the problems. I haven't got time to go through these. You just need to Google Mansfield North, London Live. London Live, Mansfield North. It's a live recordings of interviews done by London Live Television with residents of the estate as part of their big demonstration. On one of the days they had a demonstration. There's so many problems going on in this PFI scheme for 2.5 years. You just wouldn't believe it, right? So I can't go into that now. I'm just going to focus on 3. The first thing just to mention, I haven't got time. The first thing before I get kicked off, the first thing I'm going to say is they were fined £271. The things that we would find to be human rights violations, £271. So very quickly, this is the first dispossession of rights on the ground. Tenants have been forced to sign up to a E.ON energy monopoly on the estate. E.ON runs the submarine, which I just showed you. The submarine is being reconditioned. It's a district heating system. Tenants have no choice but to sign up and get hot water and heating from that submarine. It doesn't work. The submarine doesn't work. The heating doesn't work. There's been like multiple incidents where people have got no heating, no hot water, and they cannot get out of this deal. And when they try and get out of it, they get threatened with eviction. They cannot get out of this monopoly, and it don't work. Mansfield North has suddenly become Oval Quarter. The second part of this dispossession is people's communities just disappeared. Mansfield North no longer really exists anymore. You go on the internet, look at Mansfield North, you won't find it. You'll find Oval Quarter. The reason, no, I haven't got time to go into that. The reason is that the Asian investors that part own the PFI company and are investing in the housing didn't like the idea of Brixton. Brixton's got this reputation, so they thought, well, Brixton's not going to sell many flats. So they rebranded the estate as Oval Quarter, and they moved it to Oval. They haven't moved physically, but they just decided that Oval, it sounds better. So people no longer have their estate from Mansfield North anymore. And those homeowners that I said could stay, those 58 homeowners, that promise recently started to get broken. Basically, in a nutshell, it's this. Those 15 homeowners that I'm mentioning there, they cannot move their mortgages to the new apartments that they were being promised. They were promised you just move from your old house, we'll knock it down, we'll move you into a new house. All you've got to do is move your mortgage over. After the financial crisis, people who have never had a problem paying their mortgage provider, are no longer deemed creditworthy. And the mortgage provider will not even move or offer them a new mortgage. And the company that's in charge of helping the homeowners to move is the same company that's going to benefit if they don't move, because they'll sell their empty flat. And they'll make a lot of money. So this is accumulation by this. This is my final slide. This is accumulation by dispossession. Here's an example of it. 11 homes on the estate, homeowners have left the estate. They've sold their homes for between 112 and 255,000 pounds. This is an undervaluation of approximately 100,000 pounds in relation to local property prices. The new flats are selling at 360, 489, and 560,000. They're now selling at 600,000. Most of the people who've been bought out are in 2 or 3 bed properties, so they would be getting 500 or 600,000 pound flats. So the net additional land value released via dispossession is approximately 3.61 million, or more than 328,000 pounds per homeowner. So this is, if you want to calculate dispossession, if you want to calculate accumulation, here are homeowners who have basically had their equity, their property rights stolen by this PFI deal to enrich those companies by 3.61 million. That's just 15. And I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. I'll speak fast, shall I?
Okay, so I'll give a bit of context from a Chinese perspective. and talk about principally about Shanghai and Nanjing and dispossession that's going on there. But just a few words to start off with background. I think the state, I haven't actually seen this written anywhere, but I think the state has a vision of an urban society. I mean, I think that sort of follows on from the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has always had an urban bias, even when everyone said it had a rural bias. And so they are literally building an urban society. I mean, they're just building it. So they can do it because the state, or we should really call it the party state, because the two are conflated, have a presumption of a right to dispossess. So they take that for granted. The right to the city is seen as the party state's right to project and realize its vision for the city. So the right, what does the right to the city mean in China? I think it means that the party state, it falls on the party state to define and create a vision of what the right to the city means in the Chinese context. How does the state, or the party state, dispossess? Well, it does so firstly, well, the context, there are two slightly different contexts, generally speaking, although there's some overlap. One is on the urban fringe, where urban governments have the right to buy land from collectives and then develop them, and that it does. That's made easy in part because it's unclear who forms the collectives, who belong to the collectives. It's made easier because membership of the committees are often in cahoots. Members of the committees of the village committees are often in cahoots with, friends with, well connected with leaders in city governments. On the other hand, in inner city areas, there are various mechanisms of simple expropriation. So city governments can expropriate houses for development as and where they see fit. The legislative armory exists. Recent laws have meant that compensation needs to be a little more generous than in the past, but that's compensation. Nevertheless, the governments, district governments, city governments retain the right to dispossess. Running alongside this in the background is the commodification of housing. So since the 1990s, housing that was, let's call it socially owned in China, has become very largely privately owned. And a lot of new private housing has been built in China. That has gone alongside the move of industry into peripheral areas. So if you take the big cities like Shanghai, like Nanjing, which is about 220 miles northwest of Shanghai, factories moved out of inner city areas, and the housing which was adjacent to the factories, in which the factory workers lived, has been transferred to workers who've sold and moved out, or it's been destroyed, and workers have been found accommodation in the suburbs. So there's been this huge shift in the morphology of Chinese cities, which has gone alongside the been part of the process of the commodification of housing. But you know, one tries to generalize about the situation in China, but of course it's always very difficult to generalize within China, because different parts of China are different from other parts, and even within the main cities, the major cities, there are big differences. So that the main problem in Beijing has affected alleyway housing or hutong housing, quite a lot of which, well, most of which was built before the communist period and was initially expropriated from residents at that stage. Many of the residents then became tenants in houses that they previously owned, but sharing the space with other families. So some of the hutong housing is quite well appointed, and some of it has been gentrified, and some of it is indeed now quite luxurious, actually. But a lot of it's quite low quality housing with problems of, well, structural problems, problems of vermin, and other problems like that. And a number of large urban restructuring, demolition programs were undertaken with the Olympics as one of the prime factors behind it. The Beijing Olympics happened in 2008, and it's estimated that up to about 1.3 million people were displaced from their homes, moved to newer flats in the suburbs, some of them quite distant from the city centre, in order to build a city that was fit to host the Olympics. Shanghai is quite particular in the sense that a lot of housing was built in compounds in the international settlements, the foreign concessions, in the late 19th century and especially in the early 20th century, built by landlords to accommodate the influx of workers who came into Shanghai. So Shanghai has a different social history, but also a different housing history to many other cities in China. And these Lilong Lilong housing was built, that's to say terrace housing in these compounds, some of it of reasonably high standard, some of it was very cramped and very densely packed together, and most of it has been knocked down. So you can still see some, but not many, blocks of Lilong housing in inner city Shanghai, and this is one example. I've got quite a lot of slides of Lilong housing, but I've chosen only to show a few because I think they illustrate some of the issues. I mean, you can see here clearly some of the problems with this type of housing. The houses themselves are small, they're cramped very close together, and the alleyways between the houses are very narrow. So I'm going to talk a little more about, or give some illustrations, I should say, really, about the demolition of some housing in inner city Shanghai, and then later in inner city Nanjing. So let's start with Shanghai. And I walked from Shanghai railway station towards People's Square down here in July 2012, and got this far when I came upon, yeah, so just to set the context, this is the center of old Shanghai, this is Pudong over here. This Nanjing Road is, oh, where's Nanjing Road gone? That's Nanjing Road there. So we're just a 15-20 minute walk from the center of the city. And this is what you see, this is what I saw on the 2nd of July 2012. And it came as a complete shock. It probably shouldn't have. And it is one of the few remaining blocks that has yet to be demolished and gentrified. I think there are a number of things that are quite shocking about the process. One is its brutality. So people are evicted by force if necessary. Another is the way in which some people manage to cling on and to remain there and remain living and working there until the very last moment in what are known as nail houses. And nail houses gained a lot of publicity as a result of one or two very exceptional cases, but the issue of nail houses is a very well-known issue in China, seen by many as a problem, seen by some as being quite light-hearted and a bit of a joke, but increasingly over the last 5 years, 10 years, the media have at least publicized the case of people living in nail houses. That is to say, people who've tried to remain in situ, who've refused to be bullied, threatened out of their houses. Another shocking thing that this photograph attests to is the fact that this is clearly a process of gentrification. I mean, gentrification doesn't quite do justice, I think, because, you know, the word gentry sounds genteel, you know, and it's rather polite and okay, yeah, I mean, it does involve displacement, but, you know, it doesn't begin to convey the violence of this process and also the corruption of this process. I've just been reading, in the bag, I think, so down there is, sorry, yeah, I've got my library in here as well. It's all attached together, and attached to it. Oh, I've gone off camera, haven't I? This wonderful book called Shanghai Gone, written actually by a historian, an American historian of Chinese birth, I think, and it tells the story of a number of people who were violently thrown out of their homes and who have really taken up what is now a well-trodden path of protest. So they petition authorities locally, they petition authorities in Beijing, they visit Beijing, the authorities make gestures, nothing happens, nothing changes, there's talk of compromise in the air, compromise never really occurs actually, and they almost invariably run out as losers in this process. One of the things that really strikes me in reading this book is the fact that is the extent of the corrupt ties between party officials and big business property magnates, many of them based in Hong Kong, so that the Hong Kong magnates make huge amounts of money out of land which in the past, but I don't think this, well, certainly it's illegal now, which it wasn't in the past, out of land that is given to them. It's actually given to them by the district government. So there's a photograph of people trying to continue to make a living in this block of housing soon to be demolished. And this is a process accompanied by violence in a very real sense, in the sense that the demolition companies hire people to come and bully people or actually physically remove them from their homes. In this case, this looks like a private company to me. Well, it's certainly a private company, and it's employing, I don't know, I mean, some of them look like students on part-time jobs. Some of them look as if they might be from the countryside. But they're waiting to physically remove people who don't get out of the way of the bulldozers. And you know, injuries have occurred and all the rest of it, as you can well imagine. Two sets of examples from Nanjing. Nanjing, which was the capital of China briefly in the Republican period from about 1928 to 49, with a little gap in the middle. City center of Nanjing is around here. Yes, all this is center. So one's in the northern suburbs. This was all a big industrial zone of Nanjing, and the other is in the sort of popular quarter of Nanjing, right down here, but much more central than the first. So the district in the north, I visited with a colleague and a couple of his students. The houses there, very few of them still stand, but these photographs were taken in September of last year. One that does bears the typical character Chai, which means Chai Chen is destruction and demolition and relocation. So Chai is just the demolition part of the equation. So this was a former village until industrialization took over the area in the probably around the 1950s. And here's a scene of people whose property, who are still managing to eke out a living there in the ruins. We spoke to a number of people. One lady who was very coy about speaking to us, so she was convinced we were government officials. So I said, look, if we were government officials, do you really think we'd be bringing a foreigner with us? And the moment I said that, she realized that we weren't government officials. These people talked to us for a very, very long time with great passion about their plight and their complaints and their petitions. They'd had their houses removed. They were still managing to live on in those houses you can see behind them. I won't go into the details, but as we were about to leave, they wanted to give us a present, and they looked around. What could they give us? Well, the only thing they could find was pick a pumpkin from the or marrow from the plants that were growing in the rubble. So they picked it and gave it to us. And you know, what do you do when you're a visitor in the city and you're given a present like that? So, bit of a quandary. Well, anyway, it was quite heavy. So we took it down to the south of Nanjing, to this area here, which looks a little less, looks a bit similar, but which had not been an industrial area. It had always been a residential area, had been a place which was inhabited by quite well-off people, and then increasingly by people on low incomes, but fairly central within the city. So being knocked down, and we went to visit this lady here, and with her family. That's her brother on her left and her sister on her right, and her son in the front there. And we gave the pumpkin to them. And I mean, their story is that Shira was refusing to move. Why should she? To a distant suburb, which is the fate generally of people in inner city areas. She wanted to have her son go to a good school, because the better schools are located in city center and inner city areas. And she was fighting demolition, and had been for some time. She'd split up with her husband, although my colleague says, and we spoke to someone else who had split up with her husband, that some divorces are tactical, because if you are divorced, then you can get more than one compensation flat. But who knows on that point. This is my final slide. Inner city slum quote-unquote slum clearance inevitably means that people are moved to distant suburbs. And in a city like Shanghai, distant suburbs really are distant. So they're moved to distant suburbs, and sometimes they are scattered and dispersed as well. That means looking for new schools for their children. It often means long journey times to work, and again, that can be very long journey times to work. The elderly in particular suffer from a loss of neighborhood and the support that neighborhood gives. But on the other hand, in most, but not all cases, undeniably, it does lead to better quality of housing if we interpret that purely in the sense of having modern, well-appointed housing. And that's it. And so it's a,
So, first of all, I won't talk about all Buenos Aires. Yes, I will talk specifically about one case I'm following since maybe 10 years ago, but it's my hometown, my neighborhood. So I would like to share some previous results of one research related more with environmental suffering in this neighborhood, and then how we experience this new phase of dispossession related with the expansion of an industrial area in this neighborhood. Yeah, and how this expansion of the port area to a more industrialized area is in tension also with the right to adequate housing and with environmental justice issues that rise in the political agenda in Argentina. Yeah. So just some words about the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, specifically about the Matanza-Riachuelo River Basin, where is located this neighborhood called Flammable. Then we will see that the original name is not Flammable, but this is part of the dispossession process, yeah, about what was called Flammable. So this is an aerial view of the south of the city of Buenos Aires. I don't know if you have been here, but mainly this is the industrial area, yeah, the traditional industrialized area. The upper is Puerto Madero, and the neighborhood where I'm studying is near here. Then we will see another map. Some figures about the Matanza-Riachuelo River Basin. Is a river of 64 kilometers, 2,200 square meters, a population of 14 towns, Mongol municipalities, that's around 8 million, that are affected by nowadays cleaning up of this area. Yeah, it's like reorganizing the territory, yeah, controlling pollution, control industries, provide adequate infrastructure, potable water to all this river basin. Yeah. And mainly I put this like sewer and garbage dumps and industries because were defined like the main problems of the area. Okay. Specifically Flammable, what is nowadays called Flammable, is located here, yeah. And they were previously, and this is the petrochemical compound, this close to 14 industries related with the petrol production, yeah. And they were settled there in 1930s, and this settlement of these companies was facilitated by a dictatorship period. This is something quite specific and important in Latin American cases related to dispossession of land. Mainly in this area was a peri-urban agricultural area that the Italians, Germans, and Spanish migrants, previously the First War, they settled there. Yeah. Some of them, they have mainly nobody had the ownership of the land in the sense of title, yeah, but they felt really attached and the belonging. So when they in the interviews, when they spoke about the feelings to this land, they talk like, I'm the owner of this. I have lived in here for 50, 60 years. Yeah. So in my case, this possession is more related with the feeling of displacement, how is experienced in memories, the past about how was this place. Previously, the companies arrived here and performed like this kind of organic relationship, how we call it, like these company towns that provide infrastructure and services to this area. Yeah. And so I will pass through this because it was my the previous research, but was mainly focused on we have an interest in to understand collective action. Collective action is in this area, yeah, mainly because this area was built like polluted, yeah, through since 2001 because of some epidemiological studies and some studies showing the industrial pollution of the area. But mainly all the rising awareness about the pollution in this area and the environmental problems were coming from outside the neighborhood. Yeah. So in a sense, we went through how this community built this relationship with these companies. Yeah, that was a previous moment when there was full employment in this area, and this is not anymore the case since the 90s, where these plants were automatized and some of them privatized also. So the relationship started to change a lot from the 90s. Yeah. And then when it happened, these studies of pollution and epidemiological problems in children, like metals in the blood and so on and so on, even became more stigmatized as the place and completely started even to change even more the relationship with this company. Yeah. But anyway, for how we see this is how it looks like. Yeah, still the neighborhood. This road was renewed and paved, but not for the neighborhood. It's not for the companies and the future expansion of the port area. So when we talk about this kind of organic relationship with the companies, it's mainly raised by the elder generation, yes, related with this way of thinking that Shell, that is mainly the most important company, provide medicine, food, clothing, they build the school, they give materials to provide infrastructure in the neighborhood because were areas that there was not like a state presence in the sense of providing infrastructure. So this is like the view of the elder, yeah, generations. But also in these elder generations, I remember some of the neighbors, they were talking like about the displacement they suffer from Shell when Shell was settled there. And then we look also at other cases like in United States in the South where there are a lot of petrochemical compounds and where also we took like the samples of how rise this issue of environmental justice. And they talk about the same history, that these companies arrived, they took the land, yeah, by free, in the sense that nobody paid anything. These companies never paid to these previous neighbors. And also that was the state facilitating this process. Yeah. So I work in a this is how we look previously the neighborhood. That's how one of my family, my grandmother, an aunt, and another friend of them that they were enjoying the river. I mean, when I was born, I never have the possibility to enjoy that place. So in a sense, for us, still in Latin America, despite there is also evictions in the cities related with renewal of housing and new projects, urban projects in the cities. Nowadays, I have to say that for me, more the accumulation by dispossession is related strongly with natural resources. and land, yeah, just for agriculture, intensive agriculture, gold mining, water for these companies, because these companies need a lot of water, so they are next to a river. So that was the river how my family knew and enjoyed, but that's how it looks nowadays. And even this bridge is not anymore because the population is under a resettlement process. So the government decided to throw the bridge and both communities, because there are one community from this side of the river and the other, they are not connected anymore. Just as a way to avoid the new inhabitants are arriving in this area. So this is just some quotations about the interviews, how they live this place. When I was doing the interviews, I couldn't imagine that they enjoyed this kind of space next to the Buenos Aires city, when there was no this petrochemical compounds settled there. So they talk about how they were cultivating the land, how they were having their own wine production because there was a lot of Italians there, and how also they enjoyed swimming there. But then also in the last part is like what happened after the pollution. Yeah, start to be a really big problem in the neighborhood. They were not, they didn't have the possibility to go anymore to the coast of the river. Yeah. So, and this is, I think we have to think it's a long process, because it's not like something that happened like in some other cases that is something disruptive from the cotidiano's life. So it's something really long. I mean, they were there, then the companies arrived, they build this kind of company-town relationship, they provide jobs, then they provide the jobs not anymore, but the pollution was accumulating in the land also, and they were a long time like losing the way of living they had previously. Yeah. Also, I have to say they were not seeing like this place like polluted. Definitely not. Yeah, because it was not something disruptive in their life like happened in other cases in Argentina, like for example the paper mills companies where they were settled in the Waley 2 river, and we have this huge conflict, international conflict with Uruguay, that was completely something disruptive for this community. In this case, not. Yeah, and mainly what's going on in other parts of the country is related with gold mining and intensive agriculture, that these are disruptive activities. So kind of the resistance of the population and the contestation is stronger than in this case, for example, that was not like high contestation about this. Yeah, because even there is a lot of doubts about that the companies polluted the area or are polluted. So we focus why we focus on this kind of relationship. We were interested more in another part of social theory related with social domination, submission, and power relationships. Yes, just to understand that how it works in these in places like this. But the issue that then, when I entered Contested Cities Network, I started to think more broader perspective about the history of this place. Yeah, thinking about accumulation by dispossession, thinking about gentrification, and so on. So, yeah, this is, we talked something earlier about this lineal that is not coming on, I mean, it's coming from the neighborhood, the neighbors, yeah, they deny the pollution, but because Shell, the state, and other powerful actors, even doctors, deny also the health problem associated with this place and the pollution there. Yeah. So this is how it looks nowadays. This is the oldest part of the neighborhood. What you have behind is on high voltage wire lines, and then a coal plant that was carried from Holland in '95 and settled in Shell company there. And the contestation for this coal plant was coming from a neighborhood that is next to this neighborhood, not from this neighborhood. Yeah. Also, displacement, not in a sense of the displacement of how we are thinking now in the contested cities network, in the sense of displacement of people. Yeah, it's not the displacement of culpability and responsibility about the pollution. Yeah, it's the responsibility of, in this case, the poorest people in the neighborhood that they don't care of the children, and and when we were doing the interviews and we were having all this information, we say, wow, from where is coming all this? And when we interview one of the chief of Shell, there we got everything, because his discourse was this discourse, and even even he was doing like kind of division of the neighborhood. He was saying the people that are descendants from Italian and Spanish that they arrived so long time ago, they have the right to stay here. The other people that arrived here in the 90s and 80s, they don't have the right to stay here because they don't have property titles. So, and this kind of discourse is also repeated in the neighborhood. So, okay, to resume what was the kind of what we were focusing in this environmental suffering, that definitely all the discourses about and the perceptions about this are related with all these more powerful actors related with the gas. So these are some announcements in media about that Avellaneda, that is more like a county of where flammable is settled, will have this one of the biggest port in the city of Buenos Aires. We can go further, and this is kind of a resume of along 100 years the history of this place. Yeah, I mean, as I say earlier, these were the peri-urban farms next to the river. Yeah, and when Shell settled here, it happened the first displacement in this area. Yeah, that was in 1930. So in the 60s, we have mainly in most of all Latin America this development of industries, and this kind of migration from rural areas to urban areas, because it's part of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. It's not a rural area. And in '84 there was a oil ship explosion, in this area. And after the oil explosion, the government built like a arsenal for flammables, products. So during 90s, that when we have more these liberal policies in the country related with privatization of public goods, they call it to start to call the neighborhood like Villa Inflamable. The translation into English is flammable. So the first stigmatization, was started by the state, in a sense, in this area, with this name, And for example, in the receipts of my grandmother and mother to pay this rent tax because you own a property, just from coming to Oxud, that was the original name of this locality, it was coming like Villa Inflamable. It was like what happened here, So then in 90s also it happened this, I say, this plan automatization, they installed this Holland coal plant that was coming from Poland, and this high voltage wire also. And I have to say that when was contestation in this place, even coming from outside, never was successful. Never won like to stop the plant, to stop the wires. It didn't have, in this case, not from the origin also. Even if they wanted to resist this displacement, they couldn't do anything. But what happened in 2001 and 2004 for this Shaitan study that was made by cooperation with Japan, and then something we call social lawyers, they took these results and they build like they appeal to the Supreme Court about the health problem of the children there. Yeah. So what happened there, and this is the ambiguity of this process when this environmental justice issue rise in the political agenda, is that the Supreme Court took the case like a paradigmatic case in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires and ordered the government in the three instances like national, regional, and local to build this huge integral cleaning up plan for the Matanza-Riachuelo River Basin. So the people say, okay, I will tell you what for the people in the community. Finally, they will remove the petrochemical compound away. Yeah, that was the cleaning up for them. Yeah, finally we will recover. I was doing the interviews to the elderly generations, and they were saying, finally we will recover the coast, we will recover the river. Yeah, that is not the case. But what happened is a big confusion about what finally was going to happen, and the Supreme Court ordered the resettlement of this population. Yeah, and this is a contested topic because since the community was stigmatized by pollution, definitely a lot of people became aware of the health problem of children and so on. So they are fighting, I mean, about in the sense of the dispossession, they are fighting to we live, we stay, it's better to live because of children. But what will happen with all we live here? I don't want to give this land by free. This is what they are saying. I don't want to live here and they take all my sacrifice. This is something really strong also. The sense of sacrifice, they are feeling like all the things they did to build the community, to build the infrastructure, to build the social network, so on and so on and so on. So, despite the fact that the Supreme Court ruled these relocation processes, these social lawyers appear in the neighborhood, and they started to help the people in the sense of to get access to justice. In the sense that nowadays, if you don't have any document about your claims, about the issues that are affecting you, it doesn't exist. And previously, everything was managed like a public government, yeah, and the local government was like a direct interaction, a negotiation, yeah. So now what's going on is that they are resisting and contesting the resettlement policies, but not in the sense we want to stay. Is that we wish to go out because we know all the pollution in the area, but we want to go with these conditions. Yeah. So they are fighting where to go, how will be the housing, where will be the schools, the hospitals, and so on and so on. Yeah. This is mainly what they are requesting. But apart from this, that this can be read like an opportunity for this community in the sense to get better environment to live. For the other sense, also was an opportunity for a lot of international companies related with this logistic port expansion. So nowadays, what you have is like houses, and next to some houses, these containers for Amber Sud, Sea Land, this kind of company. So I put like this interrogation sign because definitely they don't know really what will happen. Yeah, because also this relocation and this resettlement always was a threat in the community. Yeah, like always was. I remember my grandmother saying, we were told since we arrived here that sometime we will be removed from here. Yeah. But apart from that, anyway, I found quite interesting talking with Stuart the concept of disaster capitalism to think about the case, and also accumulation by dispossession in a long in this timeline, no? How was happening in this community. So this is mainly the resume of the case. And I wanted to share also this of mapping of environmental conflicts around the world. Yeah, but that despite the fact that I mean all environmental conflict and sometimes can sound like this green approach, these are all related with natural resources, water, and so on. And mainly in Latin America are related with minerals and building extractions, yeah, mainly, definitely is the most, and also with water. Yeah. So these are some figures about the conflicts that they are reported by this organization. Yeah. 70% they won in a sense or were successful in a sense, but it's not the normal. So for me, when I think about accumulation by dispossession in our context, I'm thinking more in still in natural resources, and then how people is suffering the everyday life in the sense of the attachment and belonging to a place, and how it's being this transforming in the memory and the experience of everyday life in these communities. So, thank you.
Okay. Paul, do you want to come to the front?
Sure.
Yeah. Right. I'm posting the questions. So, who's got a question for us three? One of us, for all of us. Yeah.
Could I just very quickly draw some parallels out of the NHS? Any private finance initiative is going to be more expensive than the state, isn't it? Because it requires profit. It's not about providing good value, it's about providing surplus value. So, you apply insurance companies to the NHS, the profit levels needed, and so on and so on. So, what you're talking about there has parallels all over the place. Whenever you turn to private finance, which is there to make profit, not to give you service. And in terms of pollution, again, you have a good example in the asbestos industry, where the clean-up after it in Armley and Heatham Bridge was only really carried out by effectively partially privatising and seeing to it that the property was sold off to private individuals, hence Heatham Bridge is now rather than a nice area. But on our own, where we are now, I'm sort of repeating something that I said a couple of nights ago. The whole university site is an example of steamrolling in an urban residential area and not paying much for it either. You see remnants, several remnants of terraced housing within the university site. What was an entirely terraced area. It wasn't badly built. That wasn't the excuse. They were actually some of the best built terraced houses in the city. Up to the 40s and 50s, we only really had the neo-Gothic buildings and Hodkinson Tower. But that whole area between Hodkinson and the Ring Road, have a look at some photographs from the mid-1960s. It was flattened, and it was flattened only really to replace it by big concrete buildings that you see there at present. I mean, it's not just an offence in social terms, it's an offence to good taste, isn't it? I mean, it's so brutal, the architecture there. If Mussolini was alive and was brought in here, he'd be bothered. It's great. But, we're actually sitting on, in other words, a site really where, in effect, these large-scale open feeding to provide relatively privileged university, which takes a great number of its students from relatively privileged backgrounds. Sorry, that's an uncomfortable point.
I'm not feeling comfortable.
No,
Do you have a question?
Parallel.
Any more questions or comments? Yeah.
Hi. Well, thank you guys. It was fascinating. Everything really nice. But particularly, I have a question. What's your name?
Débora.
Débora. Hi. Yeah. Yeah. Well, everything was fascinating, but you said that this land was actually where you were living, right? Getting tamales and what previously called what?
La costa, the coast of the river.
Okay, yeah.
But it has a name, Barrio Porst. Porst neighborhood, because Porst was like one of the first German migrants that arrived there. So in honor to him, they call it.
Yeah, well, I think that is also great that like local people are doing scientific work in their own lands. It's beautiful. But I have a question about your methodology. I mean, how many, like, about the interviews? You showed interviews. How many interviews did you have, and what was like the objective of the interviews?
Yeah,
Because I'm asking this question because I can see two concepts there that I find like very interesting, which is like, for example, risk perception. Did you work with risk perception?
Yeah.
And also
Yeah, I didn't went like deeply to that because it was like losing the point of the evening talk in a sense, no? But yeah, I will show you. In ethnography, there is something called cubist ethnography by one of maybe famous researchers, that is Katz. And with this term, he like resumed the way of doing ethnography in this kind of places. Yeah, because you cannot understand. I mean, I cannot understand the point of view of my neighbors if I not get in the point of view of the company, of the politicians, of the media, of the doctors, of the teachers in the area. Yeah, what they are thinking about what is flammable. Yeah. So in a sense, was the only way to get this perception that I didn't went really deep, yeah, about the results of the research. And also because we combined two subject positions with my colleague, yeah, because he's sociologist, I'm anthropologist, but also he is kind of an outsider, even if he is Argentine, and I am an insider. So this combination that we call it collaborative ethnography was really used. For example, in some interviews, it was better if I was not present there, because definitely there was another kind of information arriving. But also in the sense of what the neighbor were saying about the experience of life here. For example, when he was doing the first interviews, they were saying to him, like, everything is polluted here, all we are going to die, all children are ill, yeah, and because what he was an outsider, and the population and the neighbor think, okay, he's an outsider, he's coming to get this kind of discourse. But when I was doing the interviews, I was getting another stuff, yeah, another kind of responses to. Even the interviews were like four hours maybe, yeah, and visiting more like we say life histories, yeah. And also, as I was in that moment, I was living in the neighborhood, yeah. Still, I was there, so I was eating every day, maybe in the shop. So always, I knew like kind of everything was going on in the neighborhood. Yeah? If a journalist was coming, if a new doctor was coming, if one company was coming, or, yeah. So So the information, and also they knew we were doing this research to write about the history of the place and what happens in the beginning and how is the life there now, and also to destroy some kind of myths about this place also. So this, and the interviews, I think we did formally like close to 40 interviews, but then we got like some informal conversations, a lot of informal conversations, all the work with the media, this archival work. Yeah. And
I also ran into a concept recently, in the past days. It's ecological dispossession. That's also very interesting, like when people are taken away from their usual or normal ways of life to be a different way of life.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was it.
Okay.
Any more questions? Neil.
Yeah. Thank you for all your talks. It was really useful to see them all together. And I wonder, a question: is there any? Do you know of any work that's been done to try to identify some of the actors maybe that are working at an international scale? I think your last slide showed that very eloquently. There's lots of problems happening, and perhaps there are some actors that are very have a very big impact in the world, such as Shell, for example. Yeah. And it might be interesting to see how Shell operates in different countries with different different governments, different communities, and how they can develop different strategies for different places, and perhaps in building or development, perhaps some of the Hong Kong company, perhaps from working in the state in London, perhaps they're doing the same thing or similar things in different places. I just wonder if you know if there's any study of that kind of global impact of these global actors in different places, or is it seems to be that people are studying them from their own places and those links maybe are still to be made.
I know some studies about Shell, specifically in Africa and in the south east of United States mainly. And mainly what they are saying is that they really take the advantages of the law, the flexibility of law, even the absence of law in these countries. Yeah. Or mainly is what they are saying. I mean, the impacts are quite similar. I mean, this kind of organic relationship that they build with the communities. Yeah. And in some countries, even the impacts are even worse than this. Definitely even worse than this. Another company is Dow Chemical that was previously Union Carbide that has this big disaster in Bhopal in India. Yeah. So there are some studies showing how they change the name of the company, just in a sense like to clean the image related with Bhopal disaster. Yeah, and then I think in the cases when you are like working with the affected communities, it's more difficult to get like kind of the elite that are taking decisions of this land and how they are related with politicians. So it's just like you can have like ingredients, like interpretations about what they are doing, and maybe from the figures they are showing in the web page. But if you don't get really close relationship with one of them because I don't know, maybe you know them from a gated community, like is the case on some researchers also. So there you can get another kind of information. Yeah. So this is related with that. And also I forgot to say something with the case that there is a law of expropriation of this land. So to inter-exchange with these logistic companies that are like managed by one logistic that is called Exolgan, yeah, and to settle here to expand the logistic port and to exchange the land from the people that are living there in this community to the land where they will be resettled. That was what the government did, like this exchange. And when I interviewed them, and they were really happy to do this because they say we are solving two problems. Yeah, so sometimes it's not like maybe, I don't know, like only a monopoly of the elite. Just also there are quite relationship with the national government, the local government, like to settle there, not to allow facilitate this kind of dispossession.
I can just add a few bits on that. In terms of PFI and PPP, big infrastructure projects and companies, there's a growing network around monitoring some of the big companies involved. There's just a new campaign that's been launched called People versus PFI in the UK, and there is an international working group, and a lot of people are contacting the campaign from different countries with PFI, PPP infrastructure, wanting to know more about policies, the history, the bad news, because what is interesting is that PFI gets sold to other countries as being the UK experience being really good. So all the consultants from all the big accounting firms, all the consultancy companies that go out and sell the model, they use the UK as this kind of like, look how it's been so great. It's look at the hospitals, how shiny they are, and a lot of people have no alternative information at all. There's no, obviously the way in which media works in different countries is different, so they don't have an alternative media they can easily draw on. When they contact the campaign and ask about these things, they are genuinely shocked at what they hear. We might think the reality is. What is very interesting about all of this is that there are very few corporate structures that are behind it all. If you map them all the way back to their sort of original owners, you find that it's not a handful, but it's not, I could show you a map of all the companies in one scheme, it's like hundreds, but maybe there's only really 10 owners. And of the 10 owners, they've got all the other contracts. And all the banks are the same banks. And actually, we actually invest in the banks and the companies, us, taxpayers. The Chinese government invests in British banks. The UK Treasury obviously invests in Lloyds. Lloyds invests in PFI. The web of corporate and state involvement in these schemes is incredible, but you can trace them, and then you can actually quite quickly, if you can get through the different names, because they have so many different names. So the ones I'm looking at, you have to literally go through like 10 or 20 company names, find the owners, then they pass through a tax haven, you lose the thread, and then they come out on the other side somewhere else. It could be in Scotland. You have to do a lot of work, but it's made really quick when activists and campaigners contact people and talk about a company that's coming to them, and suddenly you can connect it straight away. So there's a lot. There's been like 20, 30, longer, 40 years of international activism around big corporations. All of those big campaigns around Bhopal, Coca-Cola, they're all still going. So, yes, that's the answer to your question. Any more questions? Comments? Or, yeah, Richard.
Yeah, just thought it was really interesting because maybe we're emphasising that accumulation by dispossession. It's not just dispossession from like physical material. Goods, is it? It seemed like all three of you were talking about, a sensitive place and the relations people have with each other that need to be broken up for this kind of like, this clearing out of urban spaces to, to be implemented successfully. I was just thinking, it's really hard, like in gentrification studies, to do any work like speaking to people who've been moved out of an area. Or are there any like, do you think there's any like implications for organisation when, these communities in these areas are getting broken up, not just for stopping it, but afterwards, when people have been moved around and when there's a lot more churn? in cities. It's a really difficult point, but I'm just thinking like ahead. You know, the next 10 years, it's going to be happening more and more. Thinking that, yeah, is it worth thinking about, or even
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, it has been thought about quite a bit in recent years. And well, it's Tom Slater's work. He's really been leading, I guess, in getting people to think about the obstacles to gathering material, interviewing people who have been displaced, and then actually doing it. But you're right. I mean, it is an obstacle, and but it is one that needs to be overcome. Another approach that's been adopted by some people is starting with your first point, that dislocation is also displacement, and displacement can happen without moving. When everything around you changes, you are displaced. And there's been some good work by Mark Davidson, isn't it, on sense of displacement in London, in places like Brentford. So yeah, no, I think that is being taken up and developed, and the more the better.
Basically, what you're looking for hope. That's what you're asking. Well, what is interesting about just that example I was showing is that a lot of those homeowners are hanging on. Yeah. So it's not like they've been displaced. What's happening is that they are in the process of being dispossessed of everything, because they'll be left without any money basically as well, and they know it, and therefore they're fighting. What's also interesting is that there's a real issue of legal representation. So a lot of this is about the law and how the law works to dispossess people. So how do you fight something? Can you fight something physically, politically? Can you organise? Well, most people in that estate are too afraid to suddenly jump on the bandwagon behind a couple of homeowners. Also, there is a 10-year division on the estate. Tenants and homeowners, they get on certain things to do with E.ON, because E.ON's got the monopoly, so they're all happy to fight on that. But when it comes to the idea that you're helping a homeowner go from having something to having £500,000 in the bank as a result of the property deal, which they haven't got anything to do with, there's not a lot of solidarity going on there. So these kind of 10-year divisions, where there's no real class division on the estate, the class people are coming from the same class background. Some happen to buy with the right to buy, some didn't, because they bought the right to buy. They've got they're sitting on a lot of money, and so those divisions have kind of like come through policy, come through law, come through the way in which people's rights have been played out, and there is no legal aid for people to challenge anything. People know there's no legal aid. They know that lawyers are crooks. They won't go to them. When they go to when they go to lawyers in general, they're crooks. When they go to lawyers, they have such bad experiences that they won't go back. And they won't go to certain lawyers even when it's obvious that they're a good lawyer to go to. So people have given up on the law. They've given up on maybe some of the official residents associations, because the residents associations go through the official channels and don't want to do a lot of contestation. But they're hanging on, so they are fighting. So there is resistance there. And I think so. There is hope, but that scheme in particular is heavily politicized, heavily contested, and incredibly, they have got an open goal legally. They could go to a solicitor tomorrow. They could sign the paperwork. All of the stuff that's going on is being caught, and I think they've been on it. Look, for loads of reasons, it's not happening. So there's dispossession of like a sense of like justice. People just think the law is now really against them. They won't even go against it.
Because people are emotional about their homes. Yeah. It's not something that's easily transferred into the sort of cold light of legal litigation.
But if you want to think about the future, you just have to look at any public housing estate in London, any social housing estate, basically anywhere where they're sitting on land and rent to let. That's the next battleground. Take your pick, a lot. But yeah. I think London's where all the political organisations have to be headed, because that's where the stakes are highest, and that's where density is highest. It's where the council housing stakes are the most. That's where it has to be kind of like that.
And there certainly are parallels with Shanghai. I mean, the idea of sort of rewriting the class structure of inner city neighborhoods, you know, in Shanghai it's happened violently, brutally, but it's and it's happened a lot. In London, you've still got parts of East London and parts of South London in the inner city where it hasn't yet fully played itself out. But at this rate, I mean, South London is being transformed very rapidly, isn't it? So.
In this case, I mean, this integral cleaning up of the river basin includes like the resettlement of 17,000 families. Yeah. And just the first like resettlements were really evictions. Yeah. In the riveras of the river. Yeah, and because this caused a huge scandal, yeah, the people, I mean, saying what they are doing, I mean, okay with the right to adequate housing in a healthy environment, but this is something else. So they stopped that way, and then the Supreme Court allowed that the families that will be resettled have like a representation. Yeah, so allow this kind of social lawyers to appear and to have more power in the sense, just to become law like mediators in the court. So, but still, I mean, in this case, there were resettled 25 families. Yeah. After the Shaika study in 2005, in 2007 they were resettled 25 families in a social housing area. Yeah. And one family came back to Flamengo. They say, I'm not used to this place. I don't like this place. I don't like the neighbor here. I want to come back, and they went back again to Flamengo. But the rest, they are there. Some of them are happy, some of them are not happy, and then you can work like in satisfaction of the social housing in this area of Canoe. But I mean, they were the families that participate from this epidemiological study. So yeah, you have like another reason to. But doesn't mean that they are not. It's like you are saying that I'm hanging out between these two places, because still there are part of the family of them, like neighbors, friends, and relatives there. So they are going to that place. Yeah, it's like not that just they. So that's kind of the way of living, like living in two places. Yeah, and I'm following these families how they are doing, and what they are saying is, okay, I'm happy here because I have this house, yeah, but also, I mean, I don't have any more my neighbors, yeah, and here there are some problems related with violence, because also it's a poor neighborhood. So for some of them, it's like, okay, they got like social better conditions, but for others, no. Yeah. And better environmental conditions, but for others, not. Also because next to that place is like a highway, yeah, and then a landfill area. So also in a more anthropological sense, what we are looking at these processes of resettlement in the Matanza Riachuelo River Basin is how is the construction of these subjects. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like the let's say like the environmental morality behind these kind of processes, in a sense of. I mean, they are giving again a land that is residual in the city. Yeah, so it's tricky. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's near. For some of them, they feel it is near, and for some of them, they really feel it's far away. Yeah, I mean, objectively, it's like, let's say, 50 blocks. Like this, like, in miles, I don't know, you know, 100 meters each block, like, yeah. So for some of them it's quite far, and for some of them are not. It's the same locality. So this is something of the law of that despite the Supreme Court ordered this resettlement process, they restrict it like the distance. It has to be in the same municipality, in the same district. And for this case, yes. For this case, it's a law. So these families are having like kind of the representation, the patrocinio of these more social lawyers. But I have to say that these social lawyers are not funded by the national government or regional government. I mean, they are funded by the European Union. They are an NGO. So if they are not there, I mean,
There's no law that says that every family or community that has to be evicted has to have some housing solution near from where they are.
No, that yes. Yes, it's like, it's a resettlement, but house by house. Yeah. So what people is doing is negotiating. I mean, they are contesting and they are saying, we won't move from here. I mean, we know you need the land, but we won't move from here like by nothing. So still in some areas, it's not happening any resettlement like here since 2008. I mean, the other experience of 2007 that these 25 families is something different. It's not part of the Supreme Court trial, like something different. So nowadays, no one was resettled. There were a lot of intents, and the government says, just I have the land that this Exolgan company will give me, and then all the company will move to this area, so we will have all the industries in the same place. But the issue is that this expropriation law doesn't include the people that has property titles, like my family. There are only 4 blocks. It's like, say, like no more than 50 families. So they expropriated 200 hectares less these 4 blocks because definitely consider this more expensive. They have to pay more. The others don't have like property titles. So this kind of informality, legality, is also playing in these cases. So the people that have the property titles say, okay, what they are doing here? They are speculating because they will surrounded by a lot of companies. Then we can't stand anymore to live here, and we will say, okay, take it by free. So just for me, that's the way to also the dispossession is going on. Yeah, it's kind of fighting inside, like, and that you feel you cannot do what you can do. I mean, you appeal again. I mean, some families appeal to the court, including my family, and still we don't have a response about this. But they know they have to give a response because always the case is in media. Just 2 days ago, there was there weren't some news about the case. Like people is waiting the relocation, the resettlement, nothing is going on. Like this kind of stuff is also appearing in the media about the case.
And these families are that have resettled, so they are inside a program. They receive a house with
yeah.
a title.
Yeah, that's the other.
They had to pay this.
Yeah, it's like it's a national program for provide adequate housing. Yeah, as they call it, adequate housing. And they received, like, in some cases, I mean, are not individual housing. It's not like it's an apartment. Yeah, something that is also they don't like community because they are used to have their own land and say, I don't want to go to an apartment. I mean, I'm not used to live there. How can I manage my economic activities? Because a lot of them, they have the economic activities in their own places and their own houses. So they say, I need a space. I don't have it. And also they have to pay, but it was built this kind of way of thinking that is a symbolic payment. So it's like, for them, it's money, yeah. But the state is saying, anyway, we won't take them away. We won't remove them even if they don't pay. But people say, I want a paper that you won't remove it again, because these families has also a history of being kind of displaced from different areas of the city. Yeah. So in a sense, it's like
It's more for them, they can't sell it.
they can sell what?
If you,
The house when they have it again?
if you give a house with a title, no contract.
Yeah. No, they
you
are
can
not.
sell it.
Yeah, but they are not selling the houses. These at least 25 families that I'm following, still they are there and they won't sell the house. And they are paying the services, like public service, electricity, water, and just because they are paying those, they know they have more rights. Because in I don't know how it's here, but in Argentina is this law of the 20 annual tenure, that if you show that you are living in a place like for 20 years and you show you improve the place, that you pay services, you have rights on the land. Just you make an appeal, and it takes 4 years, and they give you the property title. So I mean, it's not secure, but they feel more secure because just they are paying these services. So in a sense, they feel they are in the city. Understand? So just but this is too.
Well, it's called usucapión.
Yeah, usucapión.
5
Exactly.
years.
Okay, there is 4.
You are there for 5 years, and the owner didn't claim the land. You can claim for your.
In Brazil, it's 5.
Okay. I think we should draw it to a close. Thank you very much for coming. It's 7 o'clock, so it's way past my first beer time. So no, beer. So I'm going to go for a beer if no one wants to join me. Somewhere near. Thanks for it very much. And, yeah. There's a table book for Veritas.
Oh,
Wait, Veritas. What time? Opposite the hospital. Here.
opposite Victoria.
Opposite Victoria. It's like a pub as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Because it was on the way to the station.
We're going to go there. We're going there. Great George. Yeah. All right.
Only I close.
Yeah, okay, great.
Oh, we need to stop the recording.
Yeah, that's cool.
Stop. Just press stop.